The evening sky above Brookhaven was painted with the heavy gray of an approaching storm, and the scent of wet earth clung to the air. The quiet main street was almost empty except for the glow coming from Carter Books, a small family-owned shop that had stood for 3 generations. Inside, Anna Carter was arranging a new shipment of second-hand novels when the first rumble of thunder rolled through the clouds. She loved the sound. It reminded her of her father reading stories to her during rainy nights, his voice blending with the rhythm of rain on the roof. But tonight there was little comfort in nostalgia. The landlord had sent another notice, and the bills were piled high behind the counter. Her mother's health was fragile, and the old store, once full of laughter, now felt like it was drowning under the weight of debts and silence. Anna tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and sighed. She was 26, modest, soft-spoken, and painfully aware that her family was one payment away from losing everything her father had built. When the doorbell jingled, she looked up automatically, expecting a customer seeking shelter from the rain. Instead, a tall man stepped through the door, holding an umbrella that dripped water onto the floorboards. He was dressed in a dark tailored coat, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. The storm outside seemed to dim around him, as if he carried his own calm inside the chaos. Anna had seen that face before, on business magazines, on television interviews, even on the newspaper clippings that sometimes arrived with financial news about city developers. Ethan Hart, billionaire investor, hotel magnate, the man who could buy entire city blocks with a signature. She froze for a heartbeat. Men like Ethan Hart did not walk into places like Carter Books. The shop was too small, too quiet, too ordinary. Yet here he was, standing amid the shelves filled with dreams and dust. He closed his umbrella and looked around, his eyes scanning the worn wooden walls, the framed photographs of her late father, the stacks of aging classics that gave the air a faint scent of ink and old paper. When his gaze finally met hers, Anna felt her throat tighten. His eyes were a deep shade of steel gray, sharp yet tired, like someone used to command but secretly yearning for peace. "Miss Carter," he said simply, his voice low and even. "I appreciate you meeting me on such short notice." Anna blinked. "You wanted to see me?" Her voice carried both confusion and curiosity. The letter she'd received earlier that morning had only said a representative from Hart Enterprises wished to discuss an offer concerning the property. She hadn't expected the billionaire himself to arrive personally. Ethan nodded once and gestured toward one of the reading tables near the window. They sat across from each other, the rain providing a steady rhythm between them. "I'll be direct," he began, clasping his hands on the table. "Hart Enterprises is acquiring several properties on this street to build a cultural complex. Your bookstore sits at the center of that design. I want to purchase it." His words fell like stones in the quiet room. Anna's stomach tightened. She had imagined this scenario before, the offer, the temptation, the thought of letting go. But hearing it spoken aloud by the man who could change her life with a pen stroke made her chest ache. "It's not for sale," she said softly but firmly. "This store is all that's left of my father's dream." Ethan's jaw shifted slightly, but his tone remained calm. "I understand sentimental value, but dreams don't pay bills, Miss Carter. My offer will be generous, enough to secure your mother's care and start anew somewhere else." For a long moment, Anna said nothing. The thunder outside echoed faintly and the wind rattled the glass panes. She could almost hear her father's laughter in the silence, the way he used to tell her, "Some things can't be priced, Anna. Some things you fight for." She lifted her chin. "Money isn't what I need, Mr. Hart. What I need is hope, and this store gives it to me." The way she said it, without arrogance, without trembling, made Ethan pause. He had faced countless negotiations, battled against ruthless CEOs, but no one had ever told him no so gently, so fearlessly. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're stubborn," he observed, and for the first time, there was a hint of something lighter in his expression. "My father used to say the same thing about me," she replied. A small smile ghosted across Ethan's face before fading again. "Then we understand each other," he said quietly. "But let me make a different kind of proposal, one that might preserve what you care about." Anna frowned, uncertain. Ethan drew a sleek folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "I don't just want to buy Carter Books, I want to rebuild it. I'm planning to open a cultural center that celebrates independent literature and small publishers. I'd like you to manage the bookstore component under Hart Enterprises. I'll fund the renovation, but you'll stay in charge. The store remains your vision, just with a little more light and stability. Anna hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the folder. It sounded too good, too unreal. Why me? She asked finally. You could hire anyone, someone with experience, not someone trying to keep her mother's medicine paid for. Ethan's gaze softened slightly. Because when my assistant mentioned how you turned down previous offers, I realized you weren't protecting property. You were protecting meaning. People like you are rare, Miss Carter. I build towers of glass and steel, but I've forgotten what heart looks like. Maybe this project needs yours. His words carried a quiet sincerity that disarmed her more than any charm could have. Still, fear lingered in her heart. Accepting his offer meant stepping into a world she didn't understand. Billionaires didn't make promises without reasons. And what would you get from this? She asked. Ethan gave a faint shrug. Public trust, perhaps. My company's image needs it. Or maybe, he said after a pause, his eyes meeting hers again, maybe I just want to believe something pure still exists in this city. The air between them felt charged, not romantic, but deeply human, as if two broken souls had recognized each other in the middle of a storm. The conversation stretched long into the evening. Anna asked questions, cautious but curious. Ethan answered with measured honesty, offering transparency rarely found in his world. When the rain finally eased and he stood to leave, Anna found herself walking him to the door. He opened his umbrella, looked back once, and said, Think about it. Don't say yes or no tonight. Some choices deserve a quiet mind. Then he stepped into the fading drizzle, disappearing into the city lights. After he left, Anna remained by the door, listening to the echo of his words. Something about him lingered. The steadiness of his gaze, the sadness behind his confidence, the way he'd said something pure. She turned off the lights one by one, the shop now bathed in the silver glow of street lamps. As she locked the door, she glanced at the reflection of her own face in the glass. For the first time in months, her heart didn't feel entirely hopeless. Somewhere deep inside, she felt that this encounter, as unlikely as it was, would change everything. That night, she couldn't sleep. The storm had passed, but her thoughts were restless. She replayed every word Ethan had spoken, every tone, every pause. Beneath his polished surface, she sensed a man burdened by loneliness, someone who hid behind wealth because he no longer knew how to trust without conditions. And yet he had offered her something no one else had, a chance to save her dream without surrendering her soul. As dawn approached, Anna made her decision. She would face him again, not as a beggar pleading for mercy, but as a woman with her own courage, ready to fight for what she loved. Outside, the morning light crept through the clouds, golden and clean after the rain. The city stirred awake, unaware that in a small bookstore on the corner of Brookhaven Street, two fates had just begun to intertwine, one shaped by ambition, the other by heart, and that both would soon discover that love, in its truest form, is not a promise of possession, but of patience. The morning after her decision felt different, as though the air itself carried a quiet hum of change. The clouds had cleared, leaving the city bathed in a soft, hesitant sunlight that glimmered off the rooftops and street signs like tiny shards of glass. Anna stood outside Hart Enterprises' towering headquarters, clutching her worn leather bag against her chest. The building rose like a giant of silver and glass, its mirrored surface reflecting the restless life of the city below. She felt impossibly small standing there, her modest clothes and gentle manners out of place among the rush of polished shoes and crisp suits that swept past her. Yet she took a deep breath and stepped inside. This was her choice now, to fight for her father's legacy not from behind a counter, but from within the storm that threatened to erase it. The lobby was vast and echoing, its marble floors gleaming under soft white lights. The receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile and handed her a temporary badge. "Mr. Hart is expecting you," the woman said, gesturing toward the private elevator. Anna's palms were damp as she pressed the button. The doors slid shut and she caught her own reflection in the steel panel, a young woman trying to hold her courage together. She whispered softly to herself, "You're doing this for the bookstore, for Mom, for everything that matters." When the doors opened on the top floor, the view took her breath away. Ethan's office was a world of quiet power, floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed the sprawling cityscape, bookshelves lined with architecture and philosophy, and a single bonsai tree placed near the window like a piece of serenity in a world of ambition. Ethan was already there, standing by the window, a cup of black coffee in his hand. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable but softer than she remembered. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said. "Or may I call you Anna?" She nodded, unsure how to respond. "Anna is fine," she managed, setting her bag down. "Good," he replied, gesturing toward the seat opposite his desk. "I'm glad you decided to come." "I wasn't sure you would." Anna smiled faintly. "Neither was I." Ethan allowed himself the briefest chuckle before sliding a folder toward her. Inside were blueprints, designs, and proposals for the new cultural center. "As discussed, Carter Books will remain the heart of this project," he explained. "But I want you to oversee the transition, the selection of books, the interior design, the community events. I want this place to feel like it belongs to the people again, not to corporations." Anna looked up from the papers, surprised. "You're trusting me with all this?" "You care more about it than anyone else possibly could," he answered simply. The next few weeks became a blur of activity, tension, and quiet discoveries. Anna arrived early each morning, sometimes before sunrise, and often stayed late, long after the others had gone home. She learned quickly that the world of business was nothing like the world of books. Every decision had weight, every conversation was a negotiation wrapped in politeness. Yet Ethan never treated her like an assistant or a charity case. He listened when she spoke, challenged her ideas, and expected her to stand her ground. Slowly, she began to understand why people followed his lead. His calmness was not coldness but control, a way of steadying chaos. And yet, beneath that calm, she sensed a loneliness that lingered in the quiet moments between meetings, when he thought no one was watching. One evening, as the sun melted behind the skyline, casting gold across the glass walls, Anna found Ethan still at his desk, his tie loosened, his eyes tired. She hesitated before speaking. "You've been here since morning," she said softly. "You should rest." He didn't look up from the laptop. "Rest doesn't build empires." "Maybe not," she said, walking closer, "but neither does exhaustion." That made him pause. He leaned back, looking at her, not with annoyance, but with an unfamiliar warmth. "You sound like my mother," he murmured. Anna smiled faintly. Then she must have been very wise. For a moment, silence hung between them, the kind that wasn't awkward but alive, filled with unspoken thoughts. Then, almost as if to break it gently, Ethan said, "Stay for dinner. The chef usually cooks enough for two anyway." She hesitated, then nodded. They ate in the office lounge. Nothing extravagant, just grilled fish, rice, and green tea. The city lights flickered beneath them, a sea of life moving endlessly while they sat in quiet conversation. Ethan told her about his childhood in a small coastal town, about losing his father young and watching his mother struggle to keep their home. "I promised myself I'd never be poor again," he said quietly, staring at the skyline. "But somewhere along the way I started measuring my worth in numbers instead of moments." Anna listened, her heart tightening. "Maybe," she said gently. "You just forgot what moments were made of, but you can always remember again." He looked at her, truly looked, as if trying to understand how someone so ordinary could speak with such certainty. "You really believe that?" he asked. "I have to," she replied. "It's the only thing that's kept me going." From that evening onward, something changed, not in what they said, but in how they began to see each other. The meetings continued, the projects expanded, but beneath the professional rhythm ran a quiet undercurrent of trust. Ethan started joining her on site visits, asking her opinion on details he once would have dismissed. Sometimes he would bring her coffee in the mornings, pretending it was nothing, and she would pretend not to notice the small kindness in the gesture. When she smiled, he found himself thinking of sunlight after rain. When she laughed, which was rare but pure, he found the sound lingering long after she'd left the room. Then came the night everything shifted. A storm had returned, loud, relentless, echoing against the city's glass towers. Most employees had gone home early, but Anna stayed late to finish final designs for the bookstore layout. She loved the quiet, the way the world outside blurred into streaks of silver rain. When she went to deliver the documents to Ethan's office, she found the door slightly ajar. Inside, the lights were dim, and Ethan sat at his desk, his face illuminated by the glow of his computer screen. But he wasn't working. His eyes were closed, his hands pressed against his temples. She hesitated at the door. "Ethan?" she said softly. He didn't respond. When she stepped closer, she realized he was trembling, not from fear but from some deep buried memory clawing its way back. She placed a hand on his shoulder, instinctively, gently. His eyes opened suddenly, wild for a heartbeat, then softened when he saw her. "Sorry," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Just a bad memory. Nothing to worry about." "You were dreaming?" she asked quietly. "Not exactly. Just remembering," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "My father used to build boats. One night a storm like this came. He went out to secure the docks. He never came back." Anna's breath caught. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say that could fill such silence. Instead, she stayed by his side, and for the first time, Ethan didn't hide behind composure. "People think success heals everything," he whispered. "But some wounds don't fade with money or fame. They just learn to hide better." Anna's hand tightened slightly on his shoulder. "Then maybe," she said softly, "you just need someone to remind you you're still human." The rain kept falling, and they sat there for what felt like hours, not lovers, not colleagues, but two souls quietly holding each other's pain without judgment. When she finally left that night, she looked back once and saw Ethan standing by the window, his reflection lost in the storm. Something inside her knew that from this point forward, their lives were no longer separate stories. They had begun to write a shared one built not on contracts or conditions, but on something fragile, rare, and far more powerful: trust. And somewhere deep in his heart, Ethan Hart, the man who had conquered empires, felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The months that followed became a gentle rhythm neither Ethan nor Anna had expected. The bookstore project took life like a painting slowly revealing its colors. What had once been a forgotten space of dust and creaking shelves now bloomed into something extraordinary, a blend of old charm and modern grace. The polished oak counters remained as Anna insisted, preserving her father's craftsmanship, but soft golden lights now filled the aisles, and wide windows allowed sunlight to pour in. The smell of new paint mixed with the scent of paper and ink, and every corner seemed to whisper the promise of beginnings. The community began to return, readers, children, poets, drawn by the quiet beauty of a dream resurrected. Ethan would visit often, sometimes in formal suits, other times in rolled-up sleeves, walking through the aisles with a sense of calm he hadn't known he was capable of. The staff adored Anna's warmth and Ethan's quiet generosity, though most could not quite understand how two people from such different worlds worked in such seamless harmony. Yet beneath the surface of this quiet success, a tension had begun to grow, invisible at first, like the hairline crack in a foundation that no one notices until it threatens to break. Ethan, for all his calm exterior, had begun to feel something he did not know how to name. It was not simply admiration, nor gratitude, nor even desire in its rawest form. It was something deeper, a need to protect, to listen, to understand. And it frightened him. For years he had kept his emotions locked away behind walls built from ambition and scars. He had watched people come and go, relationships crumble under pressure, trust turn into weaponry. But with Anna, everything was different. She didn't demand or flatter. She simply existed, honest, kind, unguarded, and that disarmed him in ways success never could. Yet he feared that the closer she got, the more she would see the flaws he worked so hard to bury. Anna, too, felt the weight of something changing between them. The air in the office carried a quiet hum whenever he entered, a tension not of discomfort but of awareness. She found herself noticing the smallest details, the way his eyes softened when he looked at the newly restored store, the way he listened when she spoke of her father, the rare, genuine laughter that escaped when something truly amused him. But she also noticed his silences, the way he sometimes stared out at the city, lost in thoughts he would never share. She knew there were pieces of him she would never fully reach, wounds he carried like invisible chains, yet she did not try to fix him. She only tried to be kind. That was her way. And sometimes kindness is the most dangerous thing of all, because it asks for nothing and gives everything. Their unspoken closeness did not go unnoticed. The employees whispered, the media speculated, and board members began to question Ethan's judgment. To them, Anna was a symbol of weakness, a sentimental distraction in a world driven by profit. One evening, after a particularly harsh board meeting, Ethan returned to his office, his jaw tight with frustration. Anna was there waiting, reviewing community proposals for the bookstore's launch event. She looked up, startled by his sudden entrance. "Rough day?" she asked gently. He dropped his briefcase on the table and exhaled heavily. "They think I've lost perspective, that I'm letting personal feelings cloud business decisions." Anna's brow furrowed. "Personal feelings?" He hesitated, the words trapped in his throat. "They believe I'm too invested in this project. In you." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with meanings neither wanted to name. Anna's heart fluttered painfully, not from joy but from confusion. "Is that what you think too?" she asked softly. Ethan turned away, his voice rough. "I don't know what I think anymore." His honesty cut deeper than denial could have. Anna felt something crumble inside her. Not anger, but disappointment, the kind that comes when someone you trust begins to retreat behind their walls again. She stood, gathering her papers with trembling hands. "Then maybe you should figure it out," she said quietly. And before he could respond, she left the office. For days, they avoided each other. The meetings were shorter, the conversations polite but hollow. Ethan buried himself in work, chasing distractions that never satisfied. Anna, meanwhile, threw herself into the final preparations for the bookstore's reopening event. Yet beneath her calm professionalism, she carried a quiet ache she could not admit to anyone. She missed the small moments, his dry humor, his unexpected kindness, the way he made her feel seen. And Ethan missed her more than he could bear. Every time he passed the empty chair in his office, every time he saw the light in her corner of the store, he felt the weight of his own fear pressing harder. The night before the grand reopening, the tension reached its breaking point. Anna stayed late, checking final details. Outside, the sky once again darkened with the promise of rain. It seemed storms had become the punctuation marks of her life. Ethan appeared unexpectedly, stepping through the doorway with a look that carried both exhaustion and regret. "You should go home," he said quietly. "It's late." "So should you," she replied, not looking up from her clipboard. He hesitated, then walked closer. "Anna," he began, his voice lower, now gentler, "I owe you an apology." She froze. "For what?" "For letting them make me doubt what matters," he said. "For forgetting that this place and you reminded me what purpose feels like." Her throat tightened. "Ethan, you don't have to say this." "Yes, I do," he insisted. "You once told me hope is what keeps you going. I didn't understand that until now. You've given me more than partnership. You've given me reason." His eyes softened, full of something she could not bear to meet. "I don't want to lose that," he whispered. "Not again." The words hung between them like fragile glass. And just as she opened her mouth to reply, a sudden crack of thunder shook the air, followed by the shrill cry of a fire alarm. Panic spread instantly. Somewhere in the back storage area, faulty wiring had sparked a blaze. Smoke began to curl up the staircase and staff scrambled to evacuate. Ethan grabbed Anna's hand without hesitation, guiding her through the chaos. The fire spread quickly, feeding on the old wood and papers. "This way," he shouted over the noise, pulling her through the side exit. Just as they reached the door, part of the ceiling groaned and collapsed. Without thinking, Ethan pushed her out of the way, taking the brunt of the falling debris on his shoulder. They stumbled into the rain-soaked street, coughing, drenched and trembling. Paramedics and firefighters swarmed the scene. Anna knelt beside Ethan as they checked his injury. Not serious, but painful enough to keep him seated. Her hands shook as she brushed soot from his face. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice breaking. "So could you," he replied softly, eyes meeting hers through the haze of rain and smoke. In that moment, everything else, and the doubts, the rumors, the distance, burned away. There was only truth left, raw and undeniable. He reached up, his fingers brushing against hers, and whispered, "I don't care what they think anymore. You're what matters." Tears welled in her eyes, mingling with the raindrops. She didn't answer, not with words. She simply took his hand in both of hers and held it tightly, as if anchoring him to something real. The fire behind them hissed as the rain began to fall harder, the flames slowly surrendering. In its light, two souls sat on the curb, exhausted, bruised, but finally honest. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew that this night would mark the end of everything shallow that came before, and the beginning of something deeper than either had ever dared to believe. Later, When the fire was contained and the authorities declared the damage minimal, Ethan stood under a borrowed umbrella, watching the soaked remains of what they had almost lost. Anna stood beside him, silent but steady. "We'll rebuild," he said quietly. "Together," she replied. For the first time, he smiled without restraint, the kind of smile that comes not from pride but from peace. The rain fell steadily, washing away the ash, cleansing the air, and somewhere deep within that storm, their hearts, when fragile yet fierce, began to find their way home. The morning after the fire dawned gray and heavy, a curtain of mist hanging over the city as if the world itself mourned what had almost been lost. The smell of smoke still clung faintly to the air, and though the damage to Carter books was far less than everyone feared, something inside Anna felt quietly broken. She stood by the large window of Ethan's penthouse, wrapped in one of his oversized sweaters, staring down at the city that was slowly coming back to life. Below, people hurried across wet streets, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers, unaware that two lives high above them were changing course again. Ethan was in the next room, his injured shoulder bandaged, his voice low as he spoke with engineers and insurance advisors, already planning repairs, already trying to make everything right. Yet no matter how much he fixed on the outside, Anna sensed a distance returning, a kind of hesitation that hadn't been there before, a silence that settled between their words like unspoken regret. When he finally ended the call, he joined her by the window. His reflection appeared beside hers in the glass, two silhouettes framed by fog. "The contractors will start next week," he said quietly. "We'll have the store open again in a month." She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the blurred skyline. "You always know how to rebuild things," she murmured. "It's what I do," he replied, but there was no pride in his voice, only exhaustion. "And what about the things you can't rebuild?" she asked softly. He turned toward her, confused. "What do you mean?" She met his eyes at last. "Trust, for example, or understanding, or something you feel slipping away but can't explain why." Ethan frowned as if he wanted to answer but didn't know how. "Anna, you're tired." "We both are." "Let's not—" "No," she interrupted gently. "Let's not pretend that everything is fine. Since the fire, you've been somewhere else, not just in your mind but in your heart." Her words hit him harder than she knew. He opened his mouth to respond, but his phone buzzed, a message flashing across the screen. He hesitated before silencing it. Yet that pause was enough for doubt to bloom in her chest. Over the next few days, whispers began to spread again. Half-truths carried through offices and boardrooms. A journalist published an article suggesting that Ethan had orchestrated the bookstore's revival as a strategic PR move, using Anna's story as emotional leverage to soften his corporate image after a controversial merger. At first, Anna ignored it, but when she walked into a meeting one afternoon and overheard two executives joking about Ethan's charity project, the fragile balance inside her shattered. She left the building without a word and took a cab straight to the old neighborhood, where her mother still lived in their modest apartment above a small bakery. The city noise faded as she walked the familiar streets of her childhood, where time moved slower and memories clung to every corner. When her mother opened the door, her warm eyes widening in surprise, Anna fell into her arms and let the tears come. Ethan didn't realize she was gone until evening. He returned to the office to find her desk empty, her notes neatly stacked, her badge left behind. Panic hit him like a physical blow. He called her phone again and again, but each time it went straight to voicemail. When he finally reached her mother the next morning, the conversation was brief and polite. "She needs time," Mrs. Carter said gently. "Please let her have it." He wanted to argue, to explain, to beg, but something in her tone stopped him. He hung up and sat in silence for a long time, staring at the empty chair across his desk, the one where Anna used to sit, her eyes alive with ideas, her voice soft but sure. The city outside continued its restless hum, indifferent to his loss. Weeks passed. The store reopened on schedule, beautiful again but hollow without her presence. Ethan attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, smiling for cameras, shaking hands with officials, but every photograph felt false, every congratulation a reminder of what he'd driven away. At night, he would walk through the aisles after closing, running his fingers along the spines of books she had chosen, hearing echoes of her laughter in the stillness. He thought of visiting her, of explaining everything and how the rumors had twisted truth, how his silence had been fear, not indifference. but he couldn't bring himself to face her. For the first time in years, the man who had conquered boardrooms found himself defeated by his own heart. Meanwhile, in her small hometown, Anna tried to start over. She took a part-time job teaching literature at a community center, surrounded by children who reminded her what stories were meant to do: heal, inspire, connect. Every time one of her students smiled at a book she recommended, she felt a flicker of the hope she once carried. Yet at night, when the world grew quiet, she would catch herself thinking of Ethan, the way he used to stand by the window lost in thought, the rare laughter that would escape when he forgot to guard himself, the gentleness in his voice the night of the fire. She tried to push the memories away, but love, once awakened, is not easily silenced. It lingers in gestures, in scents, in the rhythm of rain against glass. 3 months later, news reached her that the rebuilt Carter books had been nominated for a Regional Cultural Excellence Award. The headlines mentioned Ethan's leadership, but also highlighted her role in the project's original vision. She should have felt pride, but instead she felt an ache of unfinished sentences. Her mother encouraged her to attend the ceremony, gently reminding her that it was her father's dream being honored as well. Reluctantly, Anna agreed. The event was held in a grand hall filled with soft lights and polished laughter. As speeches echoed across the stage, she sat near the back, unnoticed among the crowd. When Carter Books was announced as the winner, applause thundered through the room. Ethan walked up to accept the award, composed, elegant, yet strangely subdued. His speech was brief but heartfelt. "This honor," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "belongs not to me but to someone who reminded me that success without soul is failure in disguise. She taught me that rebuilding isn't just about structures, it's about faith." His eyes scanned the audience, searching, and for a fleeting moment they met hers. The world seemed to still around them. He didn't call her name, didn't make a scene, but that single glance held everything unsaid: apology, longing, gratitude, and the quiet plea for another chance. When the ceremony ended, she slipped out before he could reach her. Outside, the air was cool, and the city lights shimmered across puddles left by an earlier drizzle. She stood beneath a street lamp, breathing deeply, trying to steady the swirl of emotions inside her. She wanted to hate him, to forget him, but instead she found herself whispering, "Maybe someday." Behind her, through the glass doors of the hall, Ethan watched her go, his hand tightening around the award like a silent promise he didn't yet know how to fulfill. That night he returned alone to the bookstore. The city was asleep, the streets slick with rain. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, turning on only one small lamp. The golden light spilled over the shelves, casting long shadows across the floor. He walked slowly to the center of the store, to the same spot where she had once stood defending her father's dream. He placed the award on the counter and whispered into the quiet, "You were right, Anna. Some things can't be rebuilt with money, only with time." The rain began again outside, soft and steady, and for the first time, Ethan let himself feel everything he had tried to outrun: the loneliness, the loss, the love. And far away, in her small apartment, Anna sat by her window, watching the same rainfall, unaware that across the city, the man who had once been her storm was now learning to be her silence. The world had separated them, but their stories were still tangled in the same sky. Both carried the same thought unspoken, that perhaps love is not measured by how tightly we hold on, but by how patiently we wait for the right time to return. Winter arrived quietly that year, the kind of winter that dulled the edges of the world and replaced noise with stillness. Snow gathered on the ledges of tall buildings, and the air turned sharp and clear. Months had passed since the award ceremony, yet the echo of that night remained in both their hearts like an unfinished melody that refused to fade. Ethan Hart had changed in ways even he could not have predicted. The relentless drive that once defined him had softened into something humbler, slower, more human. He no longer measured his success in contracts or quarterly reports. Instead, he began to spend his time funding local schools, small libraries, and independent art spaces, quiet investments that spoke more of redemption than ambition. And every project he touched carried a piece of her influence. People noticed a gentler tone in his leadership, a patience that hadn't existed before, though few knew its origin. Yet no matter how busy he tried to make himself, the empty space beside him remained. The quiet inside his home lingered. At night, when the city lights flickered beyond the glass walls of his penthouse, He would imagine her voice reading aloud, her laughter filling the silence, her calm presence grounding him in a way nothing else ever had. Anna, meanwhile, had built a modest but meaningful life of her own. She continued teaching literature at the community center, pouring her love for words into every child who came through those doors. Her students adored her, not just for her lessons, but for the way she made them believe that stories could change lives. Yet even as she smiled and guided others toward hope, she carried within her a quiet ache that surfaced on lonely evenings when the snow began to fall. She often walked to the town's small riverbank after class, standing beneath the old iron bridge, watching how the frozen water shimmered beneath the faint winter light. It was there she felt closest to her father, closest to everything she had once lost and found again. And sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, she thought of Ethan, the man who had walked into her life during a storm and taught her that even the strongest hearts can learn tenderness. One afternoon, as she was locking up after class, she noticed a flyer on the bulletin board. It announced a charity rebuilding project for a flood-damaged library in her district, sponsored by the Heart Foundation. For a long time, she simply stared at the name, her pulse quickening in her throat. She had heard about his new ventures, of course, seen his name mentioned in articles that praised his transformation, but she had never sought him out. She had told herself that some stories ended not with reunion but with gratitude. Yet that night sleep eluded her. Memories came in waves. The smell of rain in his office, the weight of his hand in hers the night of the fire, the look in his eyes when he'd said she gave him purpose. By morning her mind was made up. She would go to the library site, not to rekindle what had been, but to thank him properly for keeping her father's dream alive. The day she arrived, the air was crisp and bright, the snow freshly fallen. Volunteers were working among stacks of donated books, hammers echoing faintly against the scaffolding. Amid the movement stood Ethan, wearing a thick winter coat and a simple gray scarf, his hair dusted with snow. He looked different, older somehow, but lighter, as though the weight he once carried had finally lifted. For a moment Anna stood silently, watching him give directions to a group of students. He smiled at one of them, and the sight struck her with unexpected warmth. When he finally turned and saw her, the world seemed to narrow to that single heartbeat. Everything else, the noise, the cold, the passing time, disappeared. He froze for just an instant before walking toward her slowly, disbelief giving way to something almost reverent. "Anna," he said softly, her name leaving his lips like a prayer whispered after too long. She smiled, hesitant but real. "Hello, Ethan." For a moment neither spoke. The snow continued to fall between them, silent and graceful, as if nature itself wanted to listen. Then she said quietly, "I saw the project in the papers. It's beautiful. You're still rebuilding." He gave a small, almost shy nod. "Maybe because I finally understood that rebuilding isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about honoring what was good." His gaze softened. "You taught me that." She looked down, the edges of her lips trembling with the weight of unspoken memories. "I didn't teach you," she murmured. "You just needed someone to remind you of what you already knew." He exhaled slowly, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "When you left," he said quietly, "I told myself I deserved it, that I had driven you away because I was afraid of being seen too clearly. But I never stopped thinking about you. Every building, every project, every choice, I kept asking myself what you would have done." His voice faltered slightly before continuing. "You once told me that money can't rebuild everything. I finally understand. What I want to rebuild now isn't a company or a city block or an image. It's faith. Faith in connection, in decency and love." He paused, meeting her eyes. "But I don't expect you to believe in me again. I just wanted you to know I believe in you." Anna's throat tightened. She had rehearsed 100 possible conversations, but not this one. Not this humble, unguarded truth. "Ethan," she said gently, "you don't owe me explanations." "I'm not giving one," he replied softly. "I'm making a promise, not the kind that binds, but the kind that frees. I promise to keep being the man you saw in me, even if you never see me again." The sincerity in his tone broke something open inside her. For a long moment she simply looked at him, the man who had once been all edges and certainty, now standing before her like someone who had finally learned the beauty of fragility. Then, as if fate had waited for this exact instant, A gust of wind blew through the site, scattering loose pages from a box of donated books. Instinctively, both reached out to catch them, their hands brushing lightly. The contact was brief yet electric, awakening all the memories they had buried. Anna's eyes met his. And what she saw there was no longer the commanding billionaire who had walked into her bookstore months ago. It was a man who had learned to listen, to feel, to wait. She smiled faintly, her breath catching. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "Which one?" he asked softly. "The one you made the night of the fire," she said. "You said you wouldn't care what people thought anymore. You meant it." He chuckled quietly, his gaze filled with warmth. "You remember everything." "Some things," she replied, "are worth remembering." They spent the rest of the afternoon working side by side, organizing books, sharing small conversations that flowed easily, like rivers finally returning to their course. There was no rush, no declaration, only a deep understanding that time had done what love alone could not. It had healed them both. When the sun began to set, painting the horizon in shades of amber and rose, Ethan offered her his hand. "Let me walk you home," he said. She hesitated for a heartbeat before placing her gloved hand in his. They walked through the quiet streets as snow continued to fall, the world around them hushed and glowing. For once, they didn't need words. The silence between them was not empty but full, of everything that had been lost and found again. As they reached the old river bridge, Anna stopped and turned toward him. "You know," she said softly, "life has a strange way of circling back. The first time we met, it was raining, and now—" She looked up at the soft flakes drifting through the air. "Now it's snowing. Different kind of storm, same feeling." Ethan smiled, a quiet, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Maybe that's life's way of reminding us that every ending can still be gentle. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to rush you, Anna. I don't want to make promises I can't keep. But I will say this, I'll be here. Through every storm, through every season. Patiently." Her heart swelled with warmth, tears glimmering in her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. "That's the only promise that ever mattered," she said. Then, without thinking, she reached out and adjusted the scarf around his neck, her fingers brushing against his collar in a tender, wordless gesture of forgiveness. For a long moment, they simply stood there beneath the falling snow. Two souls who had weathered the storms of misunderstanding and found their way back, not because fate demanded it, but because love, when real, finds its own path home. When they finally began to walk again, the world around them seemed to glow brighter. The city lights shimmered on the frozen river, and somewhere in the distance a church bell rang softly, marking the hour. Ethan looked down at her, his voice filled with quiet wonder. "It's strange," he said. "For years I thought strength meant never needing anyone. But now I think real strength is knowing who you can't imagine your life without." Anna smiled, her voice as soft as the snow beneath their feet. "And real love," she said, "isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being brave enough to break and still come back kinder." They continued walking until their figures faded into the white blur of the winter night, not as a billionaire and a bookstore girl, but as two people finally free of the weight of pride and fear. Behind them, the city pulsed with quiet life, and above them, the stars broke through the clouds, shining like small promises fulfilled. Somewhere, perhaps, her father's spirit smiled upon them, proud that his daughter had not only saved his dream but learned to live her own. And as the last snowflake settled on Ethan's sleeve, he turned slightly toward her and said with a soft laugh, "Looks like the storm has finally passed." Anna looked up at him, her eyes glowing in the lamplight. "No," she whispered, "it's just beginning." And as they walked on, steady, hopeful, side by side, the night carried their laughter into the cold, into the quiet, into forever.